All right. Good morning, everybody. This is Youngstown's Talk Channel. Joe Danyi here. Kellen's usually across from me. She's a no-show today. Tuesdays are normally MLO Bros. They usually come in here, create some havoc and whatnot, but they are also MIA. So I'm the only one that showed up today. And so we'll have a normal show. Thanks for joining us. Youngstown Studio, just determined to bring sort of like the local element back to talk radio, giving people a chance to have a sounding board. Super important for the discourse of a community to be able to let your voices be heard and have a place for you to say whatever's on your melon and get those ideas off of your chest, so those feelings off of your chest. Because I think having the ability to rail against or dissent or disagree with what's happening is really important in the conversation, whether it's national, regional, local. I think if those who are governed don't feel like they have a voice in it, that they have a harder time being governed by the people who shut them out. So this is sort of your megaphone. A couple of the topics for today. We talked a lot about the property taxes over the last couple of months, and the MLO Bros who normally would be here today are thoroughly against revising how communities raise money through property taxes. And us homeowners, when we look at our escrow and the amount of money that we pay into what our property taxes is going to be, we take a lot of exception to how much liberty or license the communities are able to extract from homeowners separate from everybody else. It's not just about community members. It's about the people who take a stake in the community and get hammered when it comes to the role they play in propping up services for that community. And we've all seen it. My property taxes almost doubled from what I'm used to paying. And so I had to update my payments into escrow. I had to, it's definitely been risen about $500 per month in my case. And so where the state of Ohio is taking a position where they're definitely taking a stance on homeowners being exploited for the sake of services. And I'll make both arguments. I see where communities, it's a safe bet to be able to leverage homeowners to pay all the bills, and everybody else kind of gets a free ride. But homeowners, when you have such a drastic, increase in your liabilities, that's when you're like, time out. Like if I was paying $1,000 last month for services and you raise what I pay by $500, what more services can I expect to get? And the value proposition with communities, I understand the argument, but as a homeowner, you are paying more and getting the same services, so that you've got to pay attention. If you go to the grocery store and buy a loaf of bread, and your costs go up, you start thinking about how that affects you and the money that you can't spend in other departments because you've got to pay for that loaf of bread. So you basically have to consider what value is being added. So can a community provide me more than $500 of my increased costs? And the answer is resoundingly no. And so what's kind of going over the pros and cons of this. The pros are, well, let me first go into the cons. So because you can't get much value for the money that you trade to the state, the community, the state has to sort of like cap off what a homeowner is responsible for. Even a renter is responsible for. So if your landlord owns the building and they have to pay the property taxes and they raise rent, then a tenant is also responsible for the increase in the costs to an actual homeowner. And why is the burden completely put on a homeowner to carry the full weight of services, roads, fire, police departments? And if I felt like the government was really good at spending money and, was frugal and tried to spend less, then, I would know that the bulldog is on the other side of government. But I think that there's so much wasteful spending that homeowners have to like put a hard stop on what they can extract from property taxes as a whole. They can come up with creative ways to be able to raise the money they need for services by, like the rest of us do, you actually have to float the services in front of the constituents and have them be part of the decision. They got this free ride where free money comes through down the pike, and they don't have to justify the money that's being spent. And so it's almost like subscription as a service type of thing, right? And so you're obligated to be able to pay monthly. And so long that, you don't find a competing brand to spend your money elsewhere, there's no competition for it, right? Well, with your community, like what choices do you have? If they want to misspend on public services, if they want to misspend on community investment, you're just on the hook and have to pay it because it's coupled completely with your property. So I think it puts more of the obligation on representatives to be able to justify spending directly to consumers, and whether that be a community sales tax, a state sales tax, to raise the same amount of money. At least they're more beholden. I don't want less transparency. I want more transparency. I want more of the obligation to go on public servants to be able to justify expenditures than I want less. And, the MLO bros, I'll kind of make their argument for them that it's going to be a cluster, because when you take away the property taxes, it's just going to reveal itself in other taxes where it's the same amount of money just spent in a different direction. But I think the principle is that it forces those people to make the case for spending. And I know they don't want to hear that. And I know it's harder. I know it takes more time, but I am zero concerned with public servants being inconvenienced for being able to make their case for spending. If we just send them a blank check and they can spend it at their discretion, and there aren't, hordes of people questioning every decision they make, I think that's worse, not actually better. So if you have to go line item and say, hey, I would need a new fire truck, or I need to repave this road, and you go to the city and they have, or the county, or whatever it is, and the people are like, well, no, we gave you money last time and you were terrible with it, so you're not getting money this time, versus saying, like, they got to put on a good sales pitch for justifying spending the actual money. I think that's better as a counter to county and city and township spending than just giving the blank check. So I am optimistic, and I am sort of like an observer here to see what the plans are, how they, consider making a different revenue creator than property taxes. So that's why I'm solidly, I guess if you were 100% spectrum, I'm 70% on the side of taking the free lunch away from having property owners' expenses. I think the burden should be shared with everybody who enjoys services. Just like you would go to the grocery store, and if you spend money, you get to eat. And I think there are a lot of people who eat without having the expenses of what that meal costs. And I'm a big proponent for having a direct relationship between what it costs, because just like even like income taxes, and the federal government makes it super easy for your check to be deducted every 2 weeks or every month or every week. And so if you don't have to write a check in Feb or in April, then you don't have a great objection, because yours was slowly, methodically, through attrition, take out of your check. What if your employer didn't write that check on your behalf? What if you had to get to April and write a $8,000 check to the government? You would realize, what you're paying for compared to what you're getting. And you basically put more pressure on the people that are providing the service to give you more, so that you would gleefully write that check rather than, hold your nose and know that that was the hardest check you ever wrote. As an entrepreneur and business owner, I have to write big checks on a regular basis. So I hate when I write that check and know that I'm like one of the few that have to write it in one lump sum and have to consider what I'm getting for the money that's being spent. And, my standards are higher because of that. It changes the way that it processes through your brain. And so, yeah, I'm all for the principle of removing property taxes as a portion of, or as a majority of, government services. So sorry, public servants, for making your life harder, but I am not sorry, because I think it's your job to justify expenses to the constituents and the people who pay it. All right, so that's real quick. Welcome to Charlie Kirk Day. Today is the birth of Charlie Kirk. We talked about it yesterday with Kellen about we talked about yesterday whether or not whether this is a sort of like an acknowledgement with a thumb in the eye to certain parts of the our community, and or whether or not Charlie Kirk played a major role in fomenting what discourse should look like in the United States. And because he was a martyr in the way that he presented himself and his actions, I truly believe that there's a lot to be learned by argumentation, disagreement, and getting used to hearing people say things that are hard to hear. And, winning and losing and having teams and being as polarizing as things are right now, it's oftentimes when somebody says something that you don't want to hear, you want to get mad. And, I'm a debater. So, come at me and come at my position with your best, arsenal and argue your way. And sometimes, like Julie's one of my favorite reasonable persons on the left. And she adds so much value to her position because I know she's reasonable and she's not captured and she's not going to just parrot things. There's going to be some thought behind it. And so when you have disagreeing people who do disagreement, and they can get behind the podium, state their case, let their opposition state their case, and at the end of the day, still be civil and still be friendly and still be, citizens of the United States. I think that's an important, skill set for most of us to adopt. And so that's why I'm a big proponent of what Charlie Kirk stood for. Didn't agree with him, wholly. There's some things that, were probably, it's tough because when you come from a political persuasion, your ideology comes through in the disagreement. And, most of the people that I have appreciation for will come to the center to make their argument rather than argue from a position that you might not, participate in. So if, let's just say you come from the side of the Bible and you're arguing with someone who obviously does not. And so you claiming the authority of the Bible is never going to make any kind of impasses, is never going to go persuade anybody from your side of the argument. But if you take a common sense, reasonable approach to be able to come at someone, which I think Kellen and I do a really good job at doing, it's hard to argue against those claims. And so I think you bring more people into questioning their position and maybe taking in data that they would otherwise not. And I think that's a healthy part of discourse. So thankfully, schools and, our culture has been affected by Charlie Kirk's assassination, and more people are coming to the reasonable side. My kid told me the other day, and I was looking, I looked it up after when I got back. was how many people have skewed more to the theological and religious side of things as searching for answers. And I don't believe in indoctrination, so I don't think anybody should go into anything, not questioning belief structure or rule sets. I'm a rebel by nature, so I go into something wanting to know more information, and I cherry pick that information to sort of put together my beliefs. And when my kid says that hordes of 25 and younger are sort of gravitating towards theology as an understanding for the world, that means something in the landscape of the next 5 or 10 years of where our culture takes us. And that curiosity, rather indoctrination. See, and that's what I have a big hang up with academia and schools, is that kids are taught what to believe instead of a curiosity and what they like to believe, or what answers or questions could be answered for them. And I think we're breaking from that indoctrination script, and it's nice to see the younger generation, rather than just kind of accepting what they're being told, questioning it and seeing if there are deeper answers. And that's everything from science. I'm a big believer in science, but if it's an orthodoxy where you can't question who's behind the science, then I think that's just another theology. And that's, I wholly disagree with people mindlessly believing what they're told rather than using it as an origin of curiosity. Julie says, I never gave Charlie Kirk the time of day, but I'm not buying the story of how and why he was assassinated. Too many questions. And it's fair. And, it's one thing most of us had to warm up to over the last couple months is our willingness to dive in and give credence to conspiracy theories. And I'm not talking your fringe conspiracy theories, but I'm talking about like questioning the trust you had in something and that thing betraying your trust. Everything from COVID vaccine to where science led us and the data and the analysis of that data, where it led us and where we hoodwinked along the way. And so whether or not it be, questioning the authority on what somebody says about Charlie Kirk's assassination, that's awesome. Like, dig into it and be willing to, be open to new and additional information. So, Julie, if you can share a little bit more, I'm interested in that. I've seen maybe a handful, maybe 6, 7 different theories about how could be an inside job, could have been the powers that be. But I'm interested to see where your probabilities are at this point. Jerry says, I suggest we have a Vesta Stout Day. Not sure what that is. On April 13th, she had an effect on helping to stick things together and has touched the entire world. And I'm going to take a guess at this. And I'm going to say a philosopher of some kind. And I'm not familiar with Vesta Stout Day. So, Jerry, riddle me what Vesta stood for and what the quick and dirty analysis of that. Invented duct tape. Oh, wait, Jerry, you got me. Dang it. Duct tape. I see what you did there. She had an effect on helping stick things together and has touched the entire world. So thank you, Jerry, for getting me on that. But I did like whenever I love history. And so I love looking into biographies, people who were instrumental in changing things, and philosophers were important. And can you name a modern day philosopher, somebody who you think in 100 years will be renowned for their different way of thinking and their depth of their perceptions? And it would be really hard for me to think of somebody who will be, put on the pedestal of history and be looked into for today's. I think we're so superficial. I just don't think this era is going to be looked on with much from the, from an intelligence standards. So, Jerry, thank you for hurting me in this moment. And if you want to call, I did turn on the phones today because Kellen is absentia today, and should I refer to for her as if she's here, or the Emelo Bros as they're here? Probably not. That'd be kind of hokey. Big news, and I meant to bring it up yesterday, but I wanted to see how this would play out. The Gaza-Israel truce peace agreement, and I want to know before I share my dissertation. I want to hear from all of you who maybe you think this has lasting ability. You think this has some teeth to it. Do you think this will be the success that the Republicans are claiming at this point? It is great for Donald Trump and the Republicans. You have a series of 8 peace agreements that had sort of like a direct relationship from the Trump administration. And regardless of what you feel about Donald Trump, if the principle of peace and taking needless war, death, and destruction off of the table, making it popular to have put 80% of your energy into making sure the war doesn't happen, you put the war industry on notice that the people who prosper and have huge incentive to keep wars going and to keep dissent going, you take advantage away from them. If overall, like I think that most politicians, they put up the flag to see which way the wind is going, and you have their you sort of have their support, whether or not if there's advantage to having that support. And if all of those winds are pointing in the direction of making sure conflicts are not as popular, then you give the incentive back to people who are good deal makers, and give the incentive to people who are peacemakers. Then you might have an entire decade of conflict sort of being third choice, where negotiation is first, concession is second, and maybe conflict is third. Then you have more people working on taking bomb salesmen out of the equation, and letting peacemakers be first and foremost. And regardless how you feel about it, and I haven't seen any comments come through on it just yet, but that part of in the United States, we project a lot. Historically, we project. Geopolitically, we project. And so we take our experiences and we sort of like expect other countries to be just like us. Julie says, Tyler Robinson was a smart kid, but he wasn't smart enough to assemble and reassemble his weapon in a few seconds, especially when he left a screwdriver on the roof. He changed clothes, but wrapped the weapon in a towel in the woods. Also, there's a lot of speculation on ballistics. No way. So do I think that Tyler Robinson had help? And, you can wrap that in how involved the CIA is in meddling with how things go down, whether or not you can entangle United States citizens and politicians and activists into where they meddle. I would like to think that 275 CIA agents wouldn't be in the crowd of a January 6th rally unless they were doing law enforcement duties where they were trying to quash the dissent and the violence and whatever. If they were there to entrap and incite that violence, I would think that they're playing a little bit different of a game. So it's not a large step to go from actors, willing to meddle in having someone offed. And so I'm open to it, Julie. And it is there's some oddities in stories, everything from the Trump assassination attempt to the Charlie Kirk assassination attempt. There's some weirdness, but you and I would probably want to believe that our government would never be involved. Our enemies might be involved. So if you told me that, Russia was involved in offing someone who was there was an assassination or an attempt, I would believe that they want to hurt the United States. But for our government to be involved or dissenters to be involved, I think that should be off the table. But we kind of live in a world where if Kellen was here right now, she would believe in a more optimistic, view of what people were capable of. And I just don't share that view. I'm a cynic. I think the foundations of, nationalism and ethics and morals, and that be the underpinnings of who we are and what we stand for. I think when politics subverted those principles, I think we're first politically, first politics, and all those other stuff is secondary or third or fourth in the order of operations. And so if somebody can justify the death of another human being for their politics, then really everything's on the table, whether it be an enemy with no soul that is external or an enemy within our own borders. It's I consider to be all on the table. But Carter Stone said that Tyler Robinson did in fact confess, and I attribute that because he was directly involved. No matter what it is, no matter if he was part of the patsy where he thought he was doing the shooting and there were 5 other people involved, he was still directly involved. So for him to have taken the shot and been on the roof and participated, but what the question is, was there more? Were there 7 people that were involved? Were there 100 people involved? Was this being orchestrated by someone who was using them by proxies? It's all, on the table. And I hope, I don't expect, but I hope that law enforcement and the people who investigate this stuff will be honest and transparent with the people so that we will too know. Julie says having the FBI at 1-6 was blamed on Biden for getting Biden wasn't president. I did see that. And I don't have an interpretation. I'm expecting that most of it was the people around Trump at the time. He had a whole lot of Brutuses around him. There were still a lot of people in his administration from the previous administration that were directly working against him. So probably a misspeak blaming Biden, but sort of like encapsulating the fact that there were a bunch of people, judges, people in the cabinet, people in the legislature that would go over and above to make Trump look bad. And that's how my association and how I've filed this away is that there were a lot of people, everything from Comey, Brennan, FBI, CIA administration that did not want Trump to be president. And they went way beyond, what was acceptable to the public. Like you should literally be offended with how far these politicians and these bureaucrats are willing to go, for the sake of opposing another politician. And I think that's the moral of the story here is that we got to take those the power that they have and how they can bury the details and data and how they can shred the documents so that can get away with literal murder. Shouldn't be even a possibility in our government. And we've allowed it to come where they can, accumulate that much power and be able to get away with it. So I'm expecting, I saw a list of probably 12 officials that were, spanning from the Obama administration through the Trump administration, through the Biden administration, who probably will face consequences. I mean, even, Letitia James and James Comey and John Bolton, all of those people that were dirty as freaking can be. And they felt like they had the confidence that the system would protect them so that they wouldn't fall victim to the same thing that they used against Donald Trump. And, quote that I used yesterday was turnabout is fair play. And you can say that you're a hypocrite if at one point you were totally against lawfare and using the faculties of government to go after your opponent. But as an observer, I don't believe in any of it. I don't think anybody should use it, but it is extremely entertaining to watch people have the same strategy played against themselves, whether or not it's Letitia James going after Trump and then having her be targeted with the same thing that she accused somebody else of. Like the first is like, yeah, we probably don't want to play this game. The second is, oh, that's kind of ironic that you got, you're getting you're getting targeted with the same thing you used against somebody else. So when they make a movie about this era, it is going to be extremely entertaining. And I hope that, the AI directors and producers take that in account to what the people want to see. And it's just to lampoon the whole system. I just don't know how you keep this government together with how much BS has become prevalent. And if you believe that there's sanctity in government, like I just don't know how you're keeping up that delusion. Carter says Biden was president-elect and the deep state took over, and which I still think the deep state has a phenomenal amount of power. And I'm halfway, I'm halfway surprised that they haven't flexed that power up to this point. Because there's a whole lot of stuff that they can do. And I don't think that I've seen much of evidence of what they're truly capable of. And, we mentioned a bunch of times on this show, unwinding that power and control. And, we mentioned the capture of academia and poisoning the brains of students coming out of high schools and colleges. We've mentioned NGOs that can launder money with government spending that goes through some activist group and finds its way back into the coffers of politicians. We've mentioned gerrymandering and rigging different states for political gain. We've mentioned having illegal immigrants being counted in the population so that different districts are given more representation. And now, district judges and federal judges that have been positioned to take political, sort of political advantage. And then the funders, the people who have taken money and, sort of like filtered it down to political ends, whether it's the George Soros's or what's the brothers? Can't think of the name. Anyway, so the Republican, the brothers group that also does the same thing. They take this phenomenal amount of money and they influence down to the street. And when you start unwinding all of that corruption, where instead of it being the public service end, it is a political end, I am gleefully looking forward to seeing all of that power structure collapse. And, Doge took the original, sort of like the original angle on this, and they at least exposed those conduits to get money to different factions of advocacy groups. But I don't believe that it's dismantled, and I think still a good bit of that happens. So you might have maybe the centerpiece cases where who was it that got $2 billion fed to some kind of green energy scam, and that got dried up and clawed back into the back into the budget. But where that one existed, there's probably 1,000 other ones that are equally as corrupt and slimy that didn't get caught because either there were smaller but more numerous, or they just weren't as good as a political story for anybody to take notice of. Let's see. Julie says, by the way, I say I would give Trump an attaboy if he pulled off the Gaza deal, so attaboy. I am thrilled for the families of the hostages. Julie said, I heard from a congressman say that if the Epstein files are read into Congress, it will look like a jailbreak in Congress. And Carter says, "Atta girl, Julie," and I was wrong about Fetterman. Common sense he has. I'll take 3 of those points, and all 3 of those are pretty notable. That I don't think, this is just Joe's personal opinion, I don't think that part of the world can stay true to any kind of agreement. I mean, where it's a good thing and you got hostages released and you got, the bombs to stop falling. I think that if corruption in the United States is a 5, then corruption in that part of the world is like a 5,273. And so I just don't think you have any lasting agreements because there's so many people that are invested in the war that, it's going to take constant pressure to keep a peace agreement before someone, doubles back, finds out that the peace agreement isn't in their interest. I mean, think about the countries that North Korea's, the Iran, that the only way they make money and get paid off is by saber rattling. Every 2 or 3 years, North Korea pops up, says they're going to do something, and countries that would rather them not do that something pay them off, and then they don't go bankrupt and are able to keep their people fed until the 2-year cycle comes along. Well, we can't even contemplate that in the United States. We don't have to threaten the entire world in order for a payoff, but that's how they freaking survive. And so, like, when you have a country or a territory like Gaza that's propped up by terrorists, completely ruled and voted in terrorists, like we can't square ourselves with what state of mind you have to be in order to elect terrorists. And we can't contemplate, 5 people running in Russia and 4 of them dying, and the person that doesn't die gets elected for their 76th term. Like, we can't contemplate that, but that happens as just an accepted practice in some of these other countries. So we take our ideals and we sort of like project that on them, but this part of the country doesn't work the same way that we do. So I think from a marketing standpoint or a transparency standpoint, that has to be explained to us and how politics works in other parts of the world. And so where we might see as a peace agreement have something having lasting consequences, and somehow that's the blue bow on there, that is a problem child, that one strategy looks like it may have worked, but it's not going to work in the same way that it would work here in the United States. The bow is not on it. It's not something you can walk away from. It's something that's going to take 100% someone nannying from this point going forward. And I'm going to pronounce it wrong, but I don't care. Sean says the Koch brothers. Thank you for correcting me there. I couldn't think of the name, but anyway, what was I going to say? I missed that. Carter said John Fetterman too, and he too. I thought he was going to struggle. I thought that he was going to be a representative that those that don't know, he suffered some health problems, damage to the brain with his ability to communicate. And a lot of us said, like, you don't elect a person who's going to be at a strict disadvantage with his ability to communicate and strike deals and memory problems and speech problems. It's not going to be very effective. And he seemed to be very liberal when he came through and during the election cycle. Got elected, listened to him, a bunch of podcasts, a bunch of interviews with him, and his commitment to Israel is bar none. He has voted against his party on several, he's voted several times against the party line. Even things not related to Israel, he still voted against there. So I feel like the guy has a lot more common sense than we gave him credit for. And that is, I still am a little mistrusting because I listened to him, pre-election, and he was very liberally minded. I do have, like I said, I think he's more middle ground than he has captured, so that he has, a chance at being someone who can break away from the status quo and vote for what he thinks is right. And if you haven't noticed, he had a stroke. Thank you for that. Appreciate it. We have a chance, just like in the Senate right now, to have a couple of senators break ranks and vote in the continuing resolution that gets the government operating and gives them a chance to debate all of the healthcare, those healthcare considerations that should be part of the next budget. Where I can appreciate that Democrats feel like that's a pivotal piece for the midterms. They really need to get something going leading into the next election cycle, so their constituencies will say they took a hard line approach at getting something done for healthcare costs. And I also see the Republicans where they need more time, they need more discussions, they need more concessions. There's nothing ready to be done, so let's just kick the can down the road through November and see if we can get into more of those battles. So, but I think the Republicans have framed this a little better as who's responsible for the shutdowns, and anything that happens because of them, the shutdowns, is going to be hung around the necks of the Democrats. And I think that's, both of them are pretty entrenched, and I don't necessarily think this is going to be a short shutdown. I think I read, what was the last one, 37 days maybe, during the first Trump administration. They did have a government shutdown. You and I, regular citizens of the United States, didn't really notice much. But there are a bunch of government employees, a lot of government employees, that are going to start to notice when they have to work for free and they have to wait on back pay, and some suffering is going to ensue. And if the Democrats are surely going to bear the brunt of blame, that's a lot of B's. I'm not going to alliterate it anymore. If they're going to bear it, then they're going to have, a lot of inspiration to get this thing sewn up in pretty short order. And so I give it a 50-50 shot. Who breaks from the game of chicken first? And I don't think that Schumer can, unless the one thing that I think that can break Schumer at this point is if his party turns on him, and some of the non-Schumer contingent of his party takes center stage, says all the right things, gets public support, then you'll watch him double back really quick. But if you can hold that party together, this is going to be a long shutdown, and we might be in for a length of ride that they weren't counting on. Jerry says, so if the Epstein files are released, what difference will it make on everyone's situation? It's not priority one, but that and ambiguity on the healthcare addendum and dodging all questions, all they are doing is reducing the size of government right now. It's a brilliant play for the Republicans. They could not do the things they were doing right now if the shutdown wasn't happening. They couldn't be doing rifts and downsizing of the public staff. They couldn't just take a hacksaw to some of these departments that they're able to do it. So the Democrats have done them a big favor. And I think this is errant. Whoever was consulting with the Schumers of the world, I think they misjudged this one in the implications going forward. I just don't think this is going to benefit. Back to the Epstein files. And listen to Joe. Joe is right a lot of the time. So we have more than a decade of the Epstein files and what role they're going to play in politics going forward. And the level of important people that are implicated in these documents, these logs, these whatever, all evidence from all of history have already been dealt with. Things shredded, things burnt, things hidden from law enforcement. So if you were to assemble all of the evidence, there's nothing that's going to give law enforcement the ability to prosecute the people who you and I want to be prosecuted. So anything you're going to do this way going forward is going to have to be redone. The people who are going to be prosecuted need to have a fresh, They need to have fresh witnesses. They need to have fresh evidence. I don't think anything that was meaningful survived the people that were in power and control at the time. So if you think that there's going to be ledgers and video evidence and flight logs, and it's going to be able to draw a straight line between what we think and what a prosecution can be had, I think you're really misguided. But if you use anybody who's still alive, Ghislaine Maxwell needs to be protected like no one else. Whether or not you think she's a truth teller or a liar, irrelevant. She's really the only connection that we have. And who's the other guy? Was it Wexler? Was it Acosta? The people who were part of this, as we start putting together cases in the corruption of public officials and bureaucrats, you might get, as a symptom of all of that, people willing to testify to save themselves from 40-year prison sentences. And so if you couple all of that together and you have state's witnesses and you have state testimony that comes down because of people who are in trouble for other things, it might work like an amazingly grand, RICO case that we might get some of the justice that we're looking for. But if I'm putting probabilities on it, I'm saying that we probably at this point, based on what we have right now, we have speculative things that we can float onto the public that could give us a feeling for who's part of the conspiracy, part of the criminal acts that were done against young girls, but no teeth to it, which I think if I knew at least, even if they couldn't be prosecuted based on evidence, at least I'd feel better. But I also wouldn't be able to suspend my cynicism that only certain people were leaked and other people were covered for. And so I got to have trust in the process, and my trust has been so eroded at this point that we'd only get a portion of the story. But if we would somehow get other people that were implicated sort of like to start singing because of other trouble that they can get in, I'd have a little bit of trust and faith, knowing as much as I do about prosecutions and how the judicial system works, that we might, on the other side of this, have at least some of the people that face some of the justice. So I'm kind of with you guys. As much as I want the Epstein evidence to come out, don't have a lot of hope that it's going to be 100%. And if we get some kind of like token prosecution, it'll be a little bit, but I don't necessarily, I think I'm going to be disappointed no matter what happens, just based on how much time has gone by. So many administrations, so many corrupt people going through the halls of the justice system. And I hold out hope, but I don't have much belief. Let's see. Julie says, I 100% agree, Joe. Can you even imagine what will happen when the Palestinians return to the apocalypse of their homes? I think this will get worse with the Arab world. And even with the Qatar agreement, hosting some of the training on one of our air bases, really warming up. I don't know if you know a lot about Qatar, but they are 50% friend, 50% foe. The faux part of it is they still have to participate in the Arab world. And again, the rule set in the rule book is way different in that part of the world than any of us have a good understanding of. And so where I think they can help us, I think the Russians can help us. I think the Chinese can help us. I think the Iranians can help us. I think all of them are just as much a villain foe as they are someone who can help us. So it's going to take someone who has an understanding of how that world works to get all of the value we can out of, bedfellowing with our enemies and insulate the public and the rest of the world from the villainous, part of the relationship of how they have their own constituency first. They have their same ideology and politics involved as well. And this is not going to be an ally that we can bring over that is, socially homogenous with how our lifestyle and our ethics are. Different part of the world, and there's a lot of danger that comes along with those relationships. But I think the Egyptians, I think the Qatarians, I think Saudi Arabia, I think those countries, they have a lot of sway in that part of the world. And so having them as part of that group, would you much rather having counsel with those countries and have them directly forging out these agreements versus us as a Western nation, trying to make it palatable with Western voters that you did a good job of getting something done? So for instance, if we can go tomorrow and we can warm up to Russia and they can give us compliments and we can give them compliments and somehow get a ceasefire out of the deal, what are your expectations as a supporter of Trump or supporter of Kamala or Biden, right? You're going to be suspicious, which we all should, of somehow we did an agreement with someone who in a heartbeat would throw you under the bus in 2 seconds, because they're really not our friend. They are just someone who is a means to an end. And so if you're a good, you're a good person and you're good at negotiating deals, then I would have trust to know when you should put up blockades against the parts that we don't want from you. And we would invite you into the parts that you can absolutely help with the end. But you got to have agreement. So let's just say big, and this is hypothetical, big business out of Saudi Arabia benefits and profits a lot if there's lots of wars going on in the Arab world. And they can sell things, they can ally with, they can, make agreements with. People are willing to spend a lot of money when it comes to war. So peace doesn't give you an advantage financially. Well, if you're the king of Saudi Arabia and it means that you're going to make less money because you support peace, how long are you going to be willing to entrench yourself when you're at a disadvantage if there's too much peace going on along? And a lot of those governments are propped up on the perpetual prospect of war. And so where our deals are like, yeah, peace is better and there's more business that happens when you have the consistency of what peace brings. But what about all of the tribes that absolutely know nothing else but warfare? They don't know how to do business. Like, their business is freaking war. Their business is terrorism. And so, like, again, we have to get right our brains with knowing that when we start playing in those different parts of the world, that we've got to be, there got to be smarter people than us that have opinions and are pulling the strings on policy. Jay says, yep, that comment right there is genius, and they will not be hiring back everyone who was fired or laid off. Again, that was the golden goose of this shutdown, is that the Republicans are just going to be able to hack through everything without the oversight of the legislature, which the legislature would hamper the crap out of getting both people signed into the new government and people disbanded from that government. And a lot of reasonable people on the left I have conversations with, and I see their end. So let's just say, and I have to go back historically. Let's just say the government was like, I think it's a really good idea to have an expansive government and create 20 million government employees. So 14% of industry, 14% of the U.S. economy is government. And so if there's 14% of the payrolls that are competing with the private side of our economy, having less of them, right? Let's just say there's IT people and there's engineers. There's, people, policymakers and true strategists that are locked up on government payrolls. They're making a good buck and they're maybe making an impact, but I question whether or not they're in government. You're able to make an impact as an engineer as you would in the private sector, where you build things and improve things and whatnot. But you release all of those people that are tied up on the government payrolls and you put them back into actual industry where companies can use their skill set. But in the interim, you picture John Smith, right? Who's got a family, works for the government, took the job just like anybody else. And there's an unfairness in that person then being dispatched only because he became part of the government machine that a politician can decide shouldn't be as big as it is. So he loses his job and he gets put back into the private part of the industry, or part of the private part of the economy. And he's probably going to make a lot less than he did on the government rolls. As a taxpayer, I'm looking at it saying, well, wait a minute. Why were we overpaying engineering expertise just because they work for the government? Well, shouldn't they be paid a market rate for it? Why are they making such a better deal than an engineer that came out of school and worked on the private side? And that's part of the unfair competition between public and private, is that the private, or the public, they don't have to worry about their revenue. They don't have to worry about expenses. They don't have to worry about balancing their budget or surviving. You know what happens when they need money? They just get more money. And so that's where it's unfair, where they can afford to pay people more. And they're, like I said, they're directly competing with the private side, because then you take the talent and you also inflate the marketplace, inflate the wages of those industries. And that inflation, remember, because it's government funded, the government has to print money in order to pay that payroll. And then you create inflation that then costs everybody money. So this negative feedback loop means that everything costs more money, and the government's given the advantage and the private industry is given, the disadvantage. So in the interim, I wholly see the John Smith and his current peril and the bill he has to pay and the family that he has to support. I feel for that person. And I would just encourage all government workers at this point to look at what your job should pay on the public or the private side of things, and start orienting your lifestyle and setting up your plan Bs and your backstops, so that if you had to go out in the private, to see how worthwhile your expertise is. And that might mean retraining and adding skill sets that are more marketable in industries that are more at your lifestyle. So let's just say you are a mechanical engineer in government or in IT or in technology, and you're like, here's my duties for the day. And what would my duties be like if I went in the private side? I'd have to work a full 8-hour day, and I'd probably have to show up at the office, and I'd have to show my worth and making sure that what I did translates to the value that's given to a customer. And that customer would have to be willing to write the check for the services that I rendered to them. So I got to make sure that I'm a good value. Do I know enough or are good enough at something so that when they write that check for my services? And then I have to be a good deal to my employer, which I work hard enough and I do enough valuable services in the marketplace that I can make my employer more money than they have to pay me. And then you've ensured your your place in that economy, because everybody was willing to give good value for their time. The employers were giving good value, the employees were giving good value, and the end customer was given good value. And as long as that stool, right, the three legs of that stool work, where everybody's happy, then these government workers can find a true place back into society. And then for as much as government shutdowns and how it affects your life, you as the listener and viewer out there, how have you really been affected? What has changed since a bunch of people aren't going to work right now? And the answer is there's very little. So we discover what is really essential in the operations of government that we can not do without. Because if you don't notice, right, if an employee doesn't show up for the day and the day still goes on, you have to question whether or not that employee even does enough to warrant the money that you have to pay for their time. And so it gives us libertarians to say, well, okay, if we had bloated government, which you all agreed, here's evidence right now that it was bloated, because not the people who are paying the bill don't even really feel the effects of it. And so, if we got down to 50% of government, if we just said, the legislature said, the executive branch, what I want you to do is I want you to cut payrolls by 50% right now. And that's as far as we're willing to go. And then we'll observe, we'll measure, and we'll find out if 50% was enough, and keep cutting until you figured out that you had way too many people with far too little essential things that they were doing. And I'm certain when people go to work on the government dole that they find something for them to do. But the real question is what they do. Does it really, could it ever be really appreciated by the people that are paying their bills? So if you write the check to a vendor, you can actually measure what you wrote the check for and the services that you got, right? And so if you have a direct relationship with that, you can figure out whether or not you would write a second check. If government services were cut and you don't notice it, obviously somebody did. So you and I as John Q. Public might not affect it, but there are some people out there saying, hey, I went to do X and X wasn't there. And so I feel the effects. Well, then obviously the services that were rendered were important to you and your taxes should be higher and you should front the bill on things that you that you receive. So anyway, that was long-winded. Let's see comments. I wonder why the victims aren't talking. They certainly have information. And I agree sort of with sort of like I think in government, when you're a whistleblower, there is a lot of risk into talking, in the way in which government and the people of positions of power can absolutely hurt you. I remember when I first got in business, I was this naive idealist who just thought that I was going to the marketplace and I was going to give a good service and they were going to give me money for it and everybody's going to be happy. And I started coming across people who had a lot of blackmail and leverage in mind, and they would play these little power games. And I don't know how much of it was psychological, how much of it was actually real, how much power they really had to do some of the things they threatened to do to me if I didn't go along with something that they said I should do. But if I'm a victim and I know that there are powerful people, let's just say there are 100 people in the Epstein files that are prominent, that you would know their name. They were in industries where they would no longer have a job if that list came out, and what they would be willing to do to silence people that would talk against them. Would I send those people letters and say, hey, Jane Smith, I know you know, but you have to stay silent. I'll give you $1 million if you just don't say anything. Or they could say something like, hey, Jane Smith, I know you know, and I know, and I'll ruin your family and make sure you never work in your industry again if you say anything to anybody. And how much of that really happens? It happens in movies, but I've been, a practitioner in Youngstown for 25 years, right? And I ran across every threat, every element of blackmail, every element of leverage in that career. And I luckily stayed super clear of anybody ever taking aim at me. And they tried, but I never felt the repercussions of those threats, even though I didn't go along with some of the stuff that I was encouraged to do, right? And I attribute that more that I was way under the radar. I wasn't really big enough to waste the time on or take the risk of coming after. They're bigger fish than me, and I'm sure those people got gunned for more than little old me. And that's really the only way that I've squared it in my brain, that thank God I stayed small enough that nobody ever wanted to come through on the threats. And the stuff I'm talking about is I'll give you one example. So I was approached by an ethnic group, and they said, I did business with them one time. They wrote a check to me. Everything was happy. And the first thing was, hey, you know what? I can tell you that we have 40 families that are all part of our group, our ethnic group. And if you play ball, I will make sure that they bring their business to you and no one else. All you have to do for me is make sure that you spend money in our direction, back in our direction. And I was like, okay, well, I'm interpreting this and it's veiled. Could be under interpretation if I were to ever say anything to anybody. Maybe he was talking about spending money in their direction as in patronizing their businesses. Maybe it was, kickbacks and giving a percentage of what they did back to the group. And maybe it was that way. And I didn't know, but I heard the language loud and clear that I was being baited into 40 companies worth of business, and all I had to do was play ball. And I was like, I think I'm going to bail on this one. And I didn't do business, and I lost out on that group. And I know the person second in line to me absolutely went along with it, because there were millions of dollars. These were not small companies. These were big companies. There were millions of dollars at play. So you can find somebody who's just developing their business and having a couple more $1 million in revenue, and you got to kick back maybe 100,000 to the people who are making sure that it happens. Seems like a good deal, but I wasn't going to play that game because I didn't want to get caught up in a leverage situation where I was not as good at this. You know what I'm good at? Giving good value to people. You know, I'm bad at playing the game of scratch my back, I scratch yours. And so I decided to bail out, cut my losses of losing them as a customer, because I was unwilling to do whatever it is that they meant by what they said. And that is a general rule that I play it really straight-laced. I don't go into gray areas, and just do what I do. And I know I've been hampered because of that. I would say over the course of 25 years, twice a year, I get hit with one of those opportunities, in quotes, with strings attached. And every one of them, I have 100% batting average. I've never taken the bait and been beholden to somebody, because once you take that bait, you're effed, right? They own you. And once you own that favor, it will never, ever go away. And I'm talking like, think of the mob movie of your choice, and you never want to get in, because once they have you, they will, never let go. Let's see. Dennis says Wreck-It Ralph style. Dennis also says pay people more for lesser outcomes that are forced on people. Sounds great. Shut it down. Most are too entitled for that exercise. Jay says, as a libertarian, what is that? I'm assuming you support the ballot initiative to ban property taxes in Ohio, correct? What's your opinion? There is trigger an impact on the people feel more directly, I believe. So you're weighing two things. You're saying property taxes, property values went up over the last 5 years, extremely high. And there are a portion of the communities that don't have the ability to go just make more money. And so they could barely afford what they were paying before. And now they really can't afford just the property taxes they owe. So these people can very easily lose their houses because of the taxes they can't pay. And then so you have the other side of it, where the people who are paying more are not getting any better services. Everything just costs them more. So nobody can justify it. And there's no corrective mechanism to make sure that if I have to pay more, that I get more. And so it's just a great deal for communities to pay their bills on the backs of taxpayers. So think about it. If you have a councilman, or you have a group of township administrators, right? They're feeling the pinch of, how am I going to pay my bills if property taxes get disbanded? They're feeling a pinch. Well, that should be interlinked with the property owners that are having that same thought. How am I going to pay my property taxes? So who's more important, the property owners or the bureaucrats who run the administrators? Well, they're both in the same perils. Well, I'm going to always go on the side of property owners, because it's not their responsibility to make sure government workers don't have a hard day. It's the opposite. The administrators are there to make sure that the people who pay all of the freaking bills, right, are protected from dumb decisions by other people. So where I agree that removing property taxes makes it an order of magnitude harder on administrators to figure things out, I am sure with that intellect of politicians that run townships and cities, you can put together creative ways that I don't care if you have a need. You have to take that individual singular need and say, hey, Main Street needs fixed, and it's going to cost $800,000. And I know that's super low. It's probably more like $8 million. And you go to your constituents in November and say, we need some money for this road. And you put a super small ballot initiative to increase the taxes short term until Main Street is paved. And maybe instead of just having this collective budget that you can spend in 5,000 different directions, you've got to eliminate 4,000 of those just different directions, and you got to put 1,000 of them and figure out how to pay all 1,000. Good. Then do it. Then figure it out. I don't care if it's local sales taxes, but all of this, I was telling my son, we were traveling the turnpike, and, the local lore is that states come with an idea that say, hey, we'd like to put an interstate here, and we're going to put a temporary toll on it to pay for the interstate. And that toll becomes permanent. Why? Because government doesn't know how to let spending go. And it takes a great deal of gravity for them to let go of a revenue item that they had before. They'll never let it go. They've got a hunger for taxpayer money, like, a thirst that whatever. And so it takes a catastrophic event to make big government teat to go away for those people to grow a brain and figure out how to pay for things. So, Jay, yes, I am absolutely on getting rid of mechanisms that make it super easy for government to get off the teat, right? Get off of it and figure something else out. Will it be worse? Will it be better? Should I think the services of a community should be shared by every single person? So if you have to say, who lives in my community? I have 10,000 people. And my expenses are $1 million. So I'm going to take my $1 million expense. I'm going to equally divide it by 10,000 people. And I'm going to send an invoice to everybody that lives in that community to pay that invoice. And then I paid for that thing, right? That is a shared responsibility for whoever lives there. And I don't care if you're rich. I don't care if you're poor. All of you enjoy the services the community provides. If you want to take things that everybody does it, like a road, everybody enjoys it. So make it uniform across the board. But maybe there are higher risk profiles in your community. Somebody who uses services more than other people. Well, the people who don't use it shouldn't pay for it. The people who do use it should pay for it. So if you have a school and it needs to have tuition, and you have a retired person who has no kids whatsoever, then figure it out. Find out which is the most equal way of distributing the liability for services that gets spread out over the people who live in that community as equal and fair as you can get it. But this 80-year-olds paying for someone's high school, there has to be a negotiation. So if I'm an 80-year-old and I got to pay for your kids to go to school, what do I get out of the deal? Well, you've got to negotiate it back at me. Maybe good schools increase property values. So then the real estate that I bought where I can't contribute to society anymore because I'm an 80-year-old retired person, but I still need taxpayers and working people to keep doing things that increase my property value, then you have to make that negotiation and say, as the 80-year-old, you got to make your pitch to say, hey, I know you've got an expense that you're not going to get any realized value for, but here's the agreement. We're going to do some things on your behalf. What are you willing to pay for us to still make your communities better, make your economies better, make the citizens of this community contribute, and you're going to watch your property values keep going up, and you're not taking any hand in that. You're just you're going to experience the windfall without the investments is you were willing to invest in the students of tomorrow to increase your property values of today. Because the other way around, if you don't do that and the schools are terrible and all you do is introduce terrible people in your community and your property values go down, it's the opposite of that, where then you're going to be like, hey, this is unfair. I don't have much of a say in this, and yet my property value and everything I invested in my community is being devalued because of that decision not to invest back into my community. So that's the kind of conversations we have to have, but it has to be long-term people who have the ability to make these pitches and make them reasonable and make taxpayers be persuaded, not coerce them into the money that you want to spend. They have to be persuaded into the money that you want them to spend. And I think that's a much better principle. Okay, Julie says, I will notify because of the TSA I will notice because of the TSA and air traffic controller situation. And that's one thing, like even like those military payrolls, the government can deem them essential, disruptive in the actual economy. And so if we shift things over and make those payrolls happen, as we're, these are not convenience items. These are essential in the marketplace or travel or everyday's daily life. If you make payrolls and get those people working again, even if you don't bring the other people, because the people, the crux of this is there are payrolls that are not happening that, given a infinite timeline, you will never notice. And those are the ones that can stay suppressed forever, as far as I'm concerned. Nobody wants to be deleted, says Dennis. And Julie says, good for you, Joe. You would not have last long in the 70s, Youngstown. Oh, I grew up around it, and I was born in 76. Most of what I learned about the economy, business in Youngstown was in the 80s. We were at the thick of very brutal strategies for getting business done. And I watched I can't say everyone. I watched 90% of my family's peers still do business while keeping those pressures at bay. 10% of them went along with that. They either went to jail, they lost their life, or they were penalized in ways that you cannot imagine, and they ended up doing something different. And so we had cautionary tales. And so from a principal standpoint, you got to decide how you were going to operate. And it always felt to me, and how my family preached it, was you stay out of that fray. And I didn't understand why you stay out of that fray when I watched, I grew up with people who went out in the business world, and it's like they had afterburners on their back, and they had so much money and so much influence, and they exceeded everyone who authentically built enterprises the right way. Watch them prosper in the short term. And then when you watch one of these people, there was this one dude who took the bait, got access to a lot of opportunities that I didn't get access to. And I watched them on the news. I watched them in public appearances. I watched them put together an entourage. And I sat here thinking, like, did I make a bad decision by pushing against something that I believed in? But whatever, did I make a big mistake? Well, look at, they're making it. And with it, the timeline was about 5 years till I watched these people get to their pinnacle, the apex of their career, and fizzle out, because everything, their foundation wasn't built on, truth, right? Everything they had was being gifted to them because they were willing to be part of someone else's scheme. And it fizzled out quick because your value diminishes. If you can't keep ramping up what you can offer into that system, you become expendable. And that's exactly what I watched happen to all of those people. And I did not want to be a part of that. So thankfully, I got wind of that, and I got to observe that when I was in my teens. And so I wasn't ready to pull any triggers at that time. And I watched the catastrophes that happened after those people decided those things, and I stayed clear of it. I even see that to this day. A lot of people on these shows wonder why certain businesses get the time of day from an administration and don't get the time of day. And I'm not privy to what's actually happening, but based on my history and what I watched go down prior, those businesses negotiated themselves into a quid pro quo. That was the name of the game. That wasn't a dirty word. Pro quo meant that you do me a favor and I do you a favor. And if you came to the table not willing to give anything, there were 20 other people that were willing to. So the Joseph's company, and I can't make the accusation they took a quid pro quo, but what was different than them than the Sobe thermal plant? One got carte blanche, good deal, lots of help from administration, and one got put on the altar of destruction and wouldn't. So what's the differences? It would be cool if someone measured what they were willing to do and what they were willing to negotiate and how they were willing to help out. And if I were to freaking guess, I would say that one was willing and one was unwilling. And you can see how that ended up. And again, like I love my allies. I love the people who have my back and will defend me. I like going to a restaurant and saying that this restaurant is awesome, and I hope that more people go into that restaurant. But everything I say, and those are the people that I take advocacy for and are proponents of and help to push in the marketplace, all of those are freaking real. I've had some people come through my door that had terrible products and things I would never eat or do or be a part of, and begging me to go on social media and talk them up and whatever. And I couldn't do it because I couldn't trade my credibility for something I didn't believe in. Because all it's going to take is, XYZ restaurant has the best Hungarian hot peppers that I've ever had, right? And you go there and you say, Joe, that was freaking terrible. It was overpriced and it tasted like dog shit. And my credibility is gone. That's really all I have. And how people, like, I'm a man, my personality, I'm not the most likable. I am not the most socially acceptable. I'm not the most, I'm not going to have chit chat with you or rainbows and butterflies are not my cup of tea, but I am extremely proficient in the marketplace. I am really smart when it comes to making things happen. So you have to deal with the prickliness of my personality to get to the good stuff where I make things happen. So everybody who does business with me knows they have to make concessions. They got to deal with a logically minded Joe who is almost devoid of emotion to get to the good stuff where I make things happen, right? And so everybody I deal with allyship, I make just as many. I mean, MLO Bros are a perfect explanation of how they are nothing like me, but they embody the loyalty to me that I give to other people and willing to overlook the parts of their personality that grates me a little bit, right? That I truly take exception with because I know that they have my back. You ever get in a fight? This was, I would say I was probably just out of high school, so probably 18 years old. And I had I had a little bit of a, so one family, I got to be really sensitive that I don't name names in this or allude to who these people were because these are bygones and I don't want to make any new world or new era stuff happen from something bygone. But anyway, somebody had threatened somebody who was close to me, made some physical threats against someone. And I am as loyal as they come to standing up for people I care about. So where that person or those people couldn't stand up for themselves because this was a family that was extremely powerful, strong, willing to go to a certain place. And so they had some dread and fear that was that they were notable for. And I decided that I was going to stand up for them. And I told them to leave us the F alone. And we were not going to bow to what power they think they had. And their best bet was just to leave us alone. I didn't re-threaten. I just said it was more of a encouragement to leave us the F alone. And so one day when I got off of work, I pulled into a fast food restaurant. And in the parking lot, pulled in, and 3 cars surrounded mine. And one dude, I was in my pickup truck. I was all alone. I was just going to go grab some lunch. And dude was holding a baseball bat. And he came up to me and said, I heard you had a little conversation about, leaving you alone. And I want to tell you that is never going to happen. And I said, well, what do you want? Like, what is your ask here? Because obviously it's over with. And the only reason that you'd be threatening me is because you've got now a vendetta and now it's, on the front side of your brain, and now you want a little bit of blood out of me, right? So what is you want? You want to kick my ass? Do you want me to apologize? And he said, that's it. I want you to apologize. And I logical Joe that I am, I said, well, you're the one that threatened the person that I care about. What would I even be apologizing for? And they said, I want to hear apology out of your mouth right now, or else this bat is going to find you, right? And so I kind of just walked away a little bit I knew I knew I was probably done for. These people weren't going anywhere quick. And I picked up my phone, and there were a group of people that I knew had my back. And I was like, I'm about to get a beat down. I'm about to get jumped. And I made a phone call. And everybody that I freaking called was busy or made some kind of excuse. So I walked back out of McDonald's and I said, listen, I'm going to say I'm sorry because I want this to be done. And the person says, don't tell me, tell them. And so I looked at them and I said, I'm sorry. And it took everything in my being to make an apology for something I truly didn't even know what I was apologizing for, but I did it for the sake of walking out of there alive. But I didn't leave that knowing that there are brutal people out there that were willing to take my legs out. It was that everyone that I felt loyal to gave me a runaround excuse about how they couldn't come there and fight this out with me. And it was probably I don't blame them. I mean, it was a bad battle. I mean, all you're going to do is pick a fight with a connected family, and that was going to be bad on you. But I know right now, if I called Luke or Isaac and I said, listen, I'm about to get a beat down, that they would have zero questions. They would be there no matter what the spill off would be, no matter what, the ramifications would be. They would be there for me because they know that I would be there for them. I complain a lot about the devastation that they serve up to me on a regular basis, and I take it and I eat it and I make it good. I'll still complain about it, but I do it. But when it comes down to it, I knew two people I could call and they'd be there within 30 seconds is those two. So that's my loyalty, the people that are dependable, that will be there for you. It's an investment I'm making in them right now so that maybe one day if I ever need them in that capacity, I know they'll be there for me. But it's that kind of connection. So again, you orient yourself with people who you will know fill the gap in vulnerable places that you have, and that's just how how things are done. All right, let me check phones, make sure there's nobody hanging out there. Let me make sure that everything hit. Otherwise, I'm going to go for today. Yeah, we're good, I think. Yeah, we're good. All right, so I'm out of here for today. Went an hour and a half. That's good enough for you guys. So thanks, everybody, for listening and watching. Make sure that you like and subscribe to our channels, whether or not you're on YouTube, on X, on Facebook, wherever you're at. Make sure you check us out on any of our channels. We have programming Monday through Friday. Monday, Wednesday, Thursday, you have Kellen and I. Thursday, Friday, or Tuesday, Friday, you have the MLO Bros and everything that they bring to the table. Have a great day, everyone. See you next time.
Thank you for listening to this show on Youngstown Studio. This is original Youngstown content. Feel free to share our videos and tell your friends about us. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on Facebook. Thank you for your support.